Well, Cardinal Lawrence is not a guy who likes to stand in the limelight. He's someone who's comfortable, or he prefers the second row, the third row. He prefers to be an observer. Rafe calls him a reluctant kind of, dean of the College of Cardinals, the guy who's supposed to organize this conclave, organize this election, but he actually doesn't love doing it. He's full of doubt about his purpose in life, in church, and everything, and so he's kind of in the second row. So he doesn't have the most lines. He observes, he listens, he talks to people, but they do the explaining, and Rafe just thinks and thinks. He's not the most active guy in this movie, but his thoughts are. Rafe is an actor where I look into his eyes and I see what he's thinking. So when you have someone who doesn't verbalize that much, a character who doesn't verbalize that much, you need someone who expresses it with their eyes, who can tell me what's going on behind their eyes, in their brain, in their emotion, in their stomach, almost what they're feeling, with minimal facial expression. And Rafe just when you watch him, he magically does it. You look at him and go like, oh my God, I can't believe I understand what he's thinking. And he invites us into his soul in a way, and that's what makes him perfect.
He's a joy to watch on screen, definitely. And I have to ask about Isabella, because she is one of the few female roles in this, and she is such a striking character as well as Sister Agnes. Why was she the perfect fit?
Well, if I say that Rafe's character likes to be in the third row, she is in the 27th row. She's relegated to the back seats because that's what the role of women in the Catholic Church is. They're there to serve, to observe, not to observe, to close their eyes, close their ears, shut up and stay in the corner and serve the food and make the beds. And, that's her position as Sister Agnes, a nun, to accompany the proceedings of the conclave, of the election of the next pope. And she's just someone who, obviously she has an aura, she has charisma, she has a natural presence, and I can see in her eyes again what she's. I wanted to focus on her, even though she's so quiet. So I put a lot of times, if the movie's not from Rafe's perspective, in the rare instances it usually is, I put the focus on Isabella's perspective. She's almost the second most important character in the film, who quietly observes, listens, stands in the corner, but the camera always focuses on her and sees what she's thinking. And in the end, that side of, I feel like she takes us by the hand, and when she speaks, finally speaks up and breaks her silence, it almost is like she speaks us from the heart. She said, and we go like, finally someone opens their mouth, and finally she opens her mouth and says something, and it's almost like a big relief, and she can take us through this, and we feel gratified by it.
She's got one of my favourite lines in the film, the "Nevertheless, God has given me eyes and ears," and then she has a little speech. It's a great moment. And you filmed all of this in Rome as well, and you had to recreate parts of the Vatican. What was that process like?
Well, we obviously there's a white line on St. Peter's Square, and that white line means no commercial photography beyond this point. So you can't, you have to recreate everything. And we found a lot of locations for bits and pieces, but the big, like the Sistine Chapel where all the voting takes place, and the Casa Santa Marta where the cardinals live, where they're sequestered during the voting process, that we built in Cinecittà, just to because you can't have access, and also to be able to design it. I wanted the Casa Santa Marta. I wanted something that is basically the opposite of the Sistine Chapel. That feels like it would complement the idea of the of this conclave about being, shut in, sequestered in darkness. You close the doors of those rooms, and the doors would make of our rooms that we designed. The doors would make this whoosh sound and almost suck the air out of the room, and suddenly you feel like there's an oppressive silence and claustrophobia. And these walls that Susie Davis, our designer, built, do that for you. They make you feel shut in. So it was very important to recreate, or to give you the impression of a conclave, of being sequestered, of being shut in, so that at the end the light can come back in.
And one of the most memorable parts of the film for me was the score, because it hit so well. And this was the 5th time you've worked with Volker. What was your collaboration like with him?
Well, this time it was actually much more difficult to find the score because the editing, it's a finely tuned, process of, creating tension, levity, pace, and the thrilling moments of it, and that music does a lot of the work for you, and to find that, to break not to underscore everything with choir and ecclesiastical music. I always like going against the images and finding something that would add something to them instead of just underscoring it. And I always try to find music that feels like, okay, it represents what's inside Rafe's stomach in this case, what he feels, and to find music for that. And we just spent a long time trying different things until we finally, actually not that far from the end of when we had to get to actually recording the music, finally found sort of a score that felt, thrilling, propulsive, that put a fist into my stomach when I heard it, and into Rafe's stomach, and just that just felt like it would add something to the movie and take you by the hand and let you escape in this film.
Amazing. And finally, was there anything you learnt about the Conclave that surprised you the most?
Well, it did. I don't think it's surprising to say that a lot. I mean, by the way, this is sort of fiction, right? We had to make it up because no one will tell you what goes on behind these closed doors. But what is probably surprising, or what you don't expect, is in the end they're all men, like humans, like you and I, that have their failings, that have their sins, that have their shortcomings, that fall apart, that rise to the top, and that are sad, that have cell phones, that end up in a plastic body bag in the back of an ambulance, like the Pope in our movie. We'll all end up the same. So the humanity of it, and the giving into ambition, the being seduced by ambition, wanting that top job, it's actually the same as in any company in your organization. In any CEO job would fight, there are parties who would fight for that. What goes on in Washington, D.C. behind closed doors is very similar. So in that sense, I feel this movie is not like so much about religion rather than politics. It's more about the politics of power.